Hi all, and welcome to the 8th season of Art Salon. Art Salon began in 2012, and up to now, all of the art salons have met in person at the Armory Art Center, which has been a gathering place for artists, curators, art collectors, and art lovers. So from now on, turn off your video, please. Make sure that your mic is muted, sit back, and enjoy. One thing that I'm going to ask everyone to do is to imagine that they're in a room full of all of these people. Because when we've been at the art salons at the Armory in the past, there were whispers, there was laughter, and there was applause. And a live audience is a wonderful thing. So use your imagination. We're doing all of those things, we just can't hear it. And now I'd like to introduce Anastasia Samoylova. I met Anna several years ago at Art Center South Florida, which is now Ulite Arts, on Lincoln Road in Miami Beach. Anastasia was an artist in residence there at that time. And I was going from studio to studio. I walked into her studio, and I'm a photographer, and I saw photographs on the wall, I perk up. Her photographs are just fascinating. They're, the ones that I saw that night were images of Miami or Miami Beach, and images of water and images of reflections. And I also photograph reflections, so I was like, oh. And then I noticed that there were very intricate studio setups in corners of the studio, and that she had many flat planes of photography. I think there were maybe plexiglass panels, maybe some mirrors, I don't know what else, in 3 dimensions on stands and clips. And I gradually realized that she was creating very complex compositions that were waiting to be photographed. She's been adding to several different bodies of work since then, especially the photographs she makes out on the streets. She's been photographing life around the city as it grows, mostly Miami and Miami Beach, but also other parts of the South, as the cities grow bigger and taller and as sea level rises. I've had the opportunity to meet Anastasia in person several times, and most recently last November at Dot 51 Gallery in Miami. She was there to give a talk and for the launch of her latest volume of photography, FloodZones, and I'm going to show it to you now. This is FloodZones. I bought a book, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful. There's a wonderful essay in it by, maybe she'll talk about the man who wrote the essay, because I was really impressed with it. The book is beautiful, but it's also disturbing. There are photos taken throughout Miami Beach and throughout the South, and they're intimations of life to come. To quote Anna, FloodZone is a psychological portrait of life on the knife's edge of climate change in the southern United States as it faces rising sea levels. The work is gaining international attention, and even more so since this book was published. It was published by Steidl in Germany. They are a world-renowned publisher of photo books. The work was also recently on view at Dot 51 Gallery, which represents Anna in the United States. She also was represented by galleries in Amsterdam and Frankfurt. The work has been widely seen and widely praised in galleries, museums, photo fairs, magazines, newspapers, and journals of art criticism. Anna is Russian-born and lives in Miami. It's my pleasure to introduce Anna Samoylova.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elle, for your introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I will start my presentation with a short documentary film that was made right around when Elle and I met at former Art Center, South Florida. So this was produced by our wonderful CEO, Dennis Scholl, and his team. And this was a group of students in filmmaking from University of Miami that decided to make a movie about me.
We're constantly inundated by images, so we sort of take them for granted now, and those numbers no longer shock anybody. It's just sort of in our collective memory and collective psyche now. It's so easy now to share an image with the world that it's being done in huge numbers. And I'm interested in that phenomenon of contemporary culture, the idea of sharing and that exchange of information in visual form. The idea of landscape sublime, the sublime part comes not necessarily from the sublime in the landscape, but the sublime in the sort of the number of images shared with each other of something picturesque and beautiful. I look right past the screen of the computer into a three-dimensional world. And then when I print them out, it becomes a two-dimensional picture with finite, small, edges. It's a rectangle. So I want to recreate that feeling of a vast landscape of a three-dimensional environment. So I sculpt the images into a tableau that create that sort of simulated environment. And then I flatten them out again through rephotographing and printing out that environment. The work, in fact, is physically constructed and shot with camera and not manipulated. So all the layers that you see that look like they have been made in Photoshop are actual physical things that are in the space. I tend to add elements absolutely everywhere. And when I start seeing on my camera screen, and I purposely don't use my laptop for a bigger picture, I want to judge the composition on a small LCD screen of my camera. Otherwise, I get way too distracted. Then when it's just too much, I have to stop. So with this work, I try not to be very dictatorial in terms of the meaning of the work. On the one hand, it's all brought out to the surface, things like, the seductive qualities of photography, the light, the color, the composition. So in one way, I want the viewer to be seduced by that. And on the other hand, there are levels and layers that would be individual to whoever looks at the work.
Anastasia's work has a really interesting social component to it. You forget that she's spending all of this time on the internet mining through lots and lots of images. Those images come from images that are offered by the general public for use by anybody. So there's a real relationship that builds up in the works between her and the people whose work she's plucking off the internet. But somehow they all come together to create these really complex, interesting photographs.
Straight out of college, I got a job decorating windows for a designer brand back in Moscow. So these were storefront windows, and it's a finite space. It's very restricted parameters that I would have to change up bi-weekly. And so this teaches you a lot about composition, having to work within such limited parameters. I have a piece called Glaciers. I've never seen a glacier yet in my life, but I can picture how it would look like based on the images that I have seen. And I wanted to sort of create a visual metaphor for this idea of an imagined space. So I would literally reassemble an environment, a three-dimensional environment, out of those pictures that planted this imaginary scene in my mind.
Something I've never seen before in photography is Anastasia's work goes from two-dimensional, where she's mining these flat images off of the internet, to three-dimensional, where she creates these tabletop tableaus, and then she rephotographs them to become two-dimensional again. 2D to 3D to 2D. You don't see that very often in contemporary photography.
I don't think that proliferation can be stopped in any way. So I'm playing with it, I'm sort of embracing it and trying to make sense of it. The work is really my thought process about this image exchange that's happening. So I live now in Miami Beach, and between the ocean and the creek. And this new series is really made in response to my new environment. I feel like FloodZone is informed by Landscape Sublime. It wouldn't have existed without Landscape Sublime. It is almost like I'm living out one of my Landscape Sublime tableaus. I'm actually surrounded by pictures constantly. The seductiveness of the light in Miami Beach, it's like I don't have to invent light anymore. It already exists here and it reflects off of the multitude of shiny surfaces in Miami. It is sort of this jungle, but it's so unnatural already, and there's plenty of artifice for me to work with that I'm absolutely fascinated with. What are the odds for me to move to Miami Beach, which is just the embodiment of that constructed environment?
The movie was made 2 years ago. This was just the beginning of FloodZone, project that has really taken over. I started this project in 2013, so it's been quite a while. I came into photography very non-linear way. It was very straightforward. I was studying environmental design back in Russia. It was Russian State University for the Humanities in Moscow. And the program was really sort of Bauhaus influenced. Russian constructivism was a major presence. Alexander Rodchenko would be a good representative there. And I learned photography by just having to photograph my sets. I would have to build these environments for my university, for my program, and then photograph these buildings, or whatever outdoor spaces we were designing by hand with my digital cameras. This was early days of digital photography, 2001 or two. I got my first camera, which was a 5 megapixel Sony Cybershot 707. And it was like the best thing on the market at that point. My mom took out a loan for a year to pay for that camera. And seeing how photography could transform the space, how it could flatten, three-dimensional environment and turn it all into layers, learning lighting as I sort of went with it. And at the same time, digital photography and image sharing, online image sharing, internet image archives, and users that are uploading their images constantly are sort of parallel to each other. So these were the early days of Flickr, pre-Instagram. There was this image sharing website that I think was a bit more pure than Instagram. And I'm a heavy user of Instagram. But with Flickr, you would share things that you found interesting, places, travel. There were a lot fewer selfies or, so to say, lifestyle images, images promoting things or brands. There was a lot less advertising. So it's this pure joy of image making and image exchange, and this amateur photographers alongside with professionals would just upload, and it was this sort of shared ritual. And I was more interested in that than in sort of traditional photojournalism. Photography as a means of communication, it's sort of image exchange equivalent to reading somebody's blog post. And then, of course, every article would be illustrated with an image, every article online. So you get to sort of form your understanding of certain things initially based on the image that came with the text, right? Okay, lightnings. The image right here. How often do we see lightning for an extended period of time, right? It's fractions of seconds, and yet photography is able to capture it and preserve lightning in its most dramatic state. So these are, as you can see, this is a three-dimensional assemblage. I find images online, I print them out, and then I sculpt them. And the straight lines are coming from just me scoring the paper with a knife, like I used to do with my buildings when I would make models in my architecture school. Here, beaches. This is prophetic. So I was studying environmental design, like I said. I graduated in '07 in Moscow. For a couple of years, I worked as a window decorator, it was merchandiser, I guess. And then I learned that many artists began that way. So the shallowness of that space is sort of, I think, reminiscent of a window display. And I thought of these photographs as sort of needing that display. And I thought of internet archives of images as the means to, present them. So turning them into three-dimensional objects kind of monumentalizes them, as opposed to leaving them out in the ether, online, just floating around like, um, sort of ghosts that they don't have any substance, right? It's just code, ones and zeros. So making something that's very transient in a way, it has to be sourced, found, making it tangible, and then again flattening that space through photography, rephotographing those objects, and then printing out as two-dimensional prints. And this is what was mentioned under 2D to 3D to 2D in the movie. Crashing waves. Then I noticed that on Flickr, and even now, if you go on Google image search, the algorithms of those websites, they propose their own categories for things that are in large numbers. So they group them by, whatever they deem to be the criteria, considering, I guess accounting for how many images of the same kind there exist. So waves are usually crashing, mountains are usually black and white, interestingly. And this is more specific, rainy window views. I started this is one of the early images in 2013. I was in Midwest. So my graduate school was in Illinois. And behind that, you see this, the vertical lines are actually from hurricane protection window. So it's like plastic. We didn't have hurricanes, but we had tornadoes out in the Midwest. Rainy window views, this is the detail. So you see some of my own actual droplets of water, mirrors, and prints. This is funny, canyons. I think it's the Intellibi Canyon. There are books written on the subject, how to accomplish very specific results. So I was also interested in sort of this formulaic quality of a lot of amateur, semi-professional photography, tourist photography, how places tend to be photographed in the same way if they're famous places. And there are certain sort of desired results that people try to accomplish. Kind of calendar imagery, what you would expect from a place. This is the canyon. And also knowing how many images are out there, many of these photographers void any copyright restrictions. So these images are not copyright protected. They are in public domain or under Creative Commons license, which is a very specific thing that enables other creatives to use the images. So they're meant to be used, not just looked at. I found it interesting, it's sort of this democratic potential of photography where you can do whatever you want with these images because there are too many of the same kind. Books written on the subject. This is my number one destination I wanted to visit when I moved to the United States. Since I was basically self-taught in photography, I was studying architecture and again learning lighting as I had to photograph my sets. I associated American photography with Ansel Adams and Courtney Watkins. So I really wanted to visit Yosemite when I moved here. And it wasn't like Ansel Adams. It was sort of, you have to stay on one path. It was grand, but I realized, so in the bottom left corner, there's Ansel Adams with his large format 8x10 camera, but it wasn't as contrasty, and it wasn't black and white. And yet now still the tradition is so strong that these digital color images of mountains are so often converted into black and white that um, there's an entire category in the Google image search for black and white mountains. And of course on Flickr there are many. This is my black and white mountains, which isn't even black and white. It's actually a color photo of black and white prints. There are different gradations of sort of warmer and cooler tones in there. And this is how I put it together. It's a very quick time lapse, but yeah, I built it all on set. So it's kind of like small theater sets in a way. And the size is about 30 by 40, 40 by 50 inches. And then I print them to the same scale. So they're 1-to-1 glaciers. This one is funny. I started teaching and I was inspired by this teaching photography, this funny story of two photographers in a lawsuit. So one was suing the other for stealing her image and photoshopping it to sort of more dramatic effects. And I noticed that, the images that are most popular on social media are the ones that are sort of intensely picturesque to the point of artifice. So the one on the bottom left won this contest that came with some sort of monetary prize. And then the top one of the glacier was suing this one. And it turned out that these were two tourists on the same boat, and it was just the same glacier. And then on the bottom right, different glacier. That got me thinking how photography sort of preserves objects in time. Inevitably, it sort of freezes things in their most dramatic moments, and then they don't necessarily stay that way, right? We know that glaciers are melting, and that's just one of many examples where photography can be sort of deceptive. On the formal level, I realized way later on that I'm certainly influenced by the Russian avant-garde, especially by my favorite women painters. So you can see the same kind of distortion of space, dynamic lines. Here's the Bakova, painfully architectonic. So it's as if like these pictorial planes are clashing into each other. Another one, Alexandra Exter, who was well known for her theater sets. This is one of them, a proposal for stage. So certainly similarities. And then Barbara Caston was a discovery, Chicago-based artist, contemporary, been practicing for a long, long time. And then I realized that while we have the same roots, it's Bauhaus. So Chicago is known for Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. And then this is sort of the lineage is the same. This is my desert mirages and forests here. So you see the mirrors on the bottom. Similar compositions. This is my favorite one, Natalia Goncharova, her landscape. You can see in that case, it's almost like, and this is a later discovery. It actually looks like photographic prints, prints that have been folded, reassembled. My aspens here, 2013, early ones. Trees and fog, another category. So there's sort of, they can't, you can't take these at face value. There's definitely humor there. Storms and rainbows, double rainbow. At the same time, I am a social media image user. And whenever I see a double rainbow, I'm certainly going to photograph it and upload it and share the joy. That ended up on a recent cover of a catalog, Biennial of Contemporary Photography, that happened in Germany, and actually it was extended for the summer, so it just recently closed. I like the sort of malleable, the moldable quality of these kinds of pictures. You can certainly fold them easily. They don't lose in composition. This is how the installation looked like. So this is my mountains, aspens, and beaches at the museum over there, which are now part of the museum collection because they had an incredible collection of Russian avant-garde from the 20s. And so hopefully they'll be exhibited in the same space. This is actually, I discovered a painting by Rosen over there, and this is side by side. So this is with that German museum. This one is called Four Seasons. So it's from Landscape Sublime, one of the recent ones. I had an intern who has never seen seasons. And so we decided to do Four Seasons and work with all kinds of imagery that's sort of calendar-like representative of the seasons. This was initially a commission for Mount Sinai Emergency Department, the new building in Miami Beach. And it's up there. It's very long. It's 26-foot long panorama. And this is how it's presented at the museum. It's mounted to glass and sort of frameless, blowing into each other. This was a commission for this Biennale. It's a funny one, 6 real Matterhorns. I thought, well, what would be, like a recognizable, iconic thing in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, this famous Swiss skiing resort, Matterhorn. And you can only see the sort of the shape of the horn from one position. So again, it speaks to the single perspective in photography, how it's always somebody's sort of singular point of view. So it's like analyzing the medium itself. And then there are actually 7 Matterhorns here. Again, these are tourists, amateur, whatever, photographers uploaded images that have no copyright restrictions that you're meant to use somehow. So I am using them. And there's the 7th is from Disneyland in California. And that one has a waterfall somewhere. And the Disneyland one was built, inspired by pictures of Matterhorn. So sort of meta Matterhorn that's happening. And that's how it looked like on the facade of a museum. So this is in February. And this is how it was on the spread, which I thought was just a great pairing, because the sublime refers to the Kantian sublime, something that's so big it can overwhelm an individual. And like I mentioned in the movie, to me, the sublime is also not only in the grandiosity of those landscapes, but also in the number of pictures made in the same manner of those landscapes, of those iconic places. And sort of what makes those places iconic is their, again, picturability, the sheer number of images that circulate of the same thing. And then Matterhorn's another thing here from a recent article that actually just came up that the ice is melting. This one, here you see the top of the screen. But these are some images if you do Google image search for climate change imagery. I'm going to try this. Someone else. This is what comes up, and you don't even need to see that in detail. It's usually some sort of drama, highly manipulated, intensified imagery that is frankly not very relatable. In 2016, I moved to Miami. I got into an artist residency, Fountainhead, with Catherine myself, and then later on into the art center, the studio that I had there for 2 years. It was just a wonderful opportunity to get to know the place. And while in residency, so that movie again was 2018, I started photographing just to understand this new place. I'm a Nordic person. I come from Moscow, and then I lived in the Chicago area for 7 years in the Northeast. And then Miami was just a completely different world. So to process it, I think the relocation, the place itself propelled the shift in my practice. I was a studio-based artist forever, as long as I remember myself. So it's always sketching, drawing, I paint, and then my photography is, you see now, it sort of has to do more with painting than it had to do with photography. sort of analyzes the language of photography rather than, in a traditional way, captures dramatic moments. So FloodZone started very speculatively. I was just sort of go out in the morning while it wasn't too hot and photograph whatever I found interesting. I arrived in Miami with, some notions about global warming was the term, and I was working with the subject of industrial agriculture back when I was in Midwest. I shot a documentary film, and then I analyzed the imagery associated with industrial agriculture and monocultural farms over there. But then climate change was really not something that occupied my thoughts. And in Miami 2016, there was my first hurricane ever, Hurricane Matthew, which was only category 3. So all the neighbors just got together and sort of calmed me down with some wine. it seemed like there's nothing terrible was happening. And then in 2017, Hurricane Irma hit, and we did not evacuate with my family. We thought, oh, well, it shouldn't be a big deal, but it was certainly sublime in a sort of classic sense of that term, FloodZone. I noticed that in Miami, I didn't really have to sort of construct the tableaus. It was already a construct, ready for me to photograph. It's sort of plastered with images of its own perfect self, constantly advertising better real estate and more tourist opportunities. So I noticed those all throughout my walks in Miami Beach. There's billboards covering up facades. And what you see here, nothing is staged. So all of this, you living, if somebody's from Miami Beach, you can recognize some of those places. It's how it is. Um, so in this case, photography, with Landscape Sublime, I would start from blank canvas and build and then photograph. And then with this, it was sort of the art of reduction. It's like an overwhelming, very kaleidoscopic, image saturated world that I would try to reduce to sort of a statement. Like this construction in Normandy Shores, and the construction worker behind the couple in the luxury pool. Construction in South Beach. This one is almost like cubist composition. I thought this semi-destroyed billboard with printed fence up front, and then the garbage, construction garbage in the middle ground, and in the background is the hotel's facade. And this is 2017, and it's still kind of like that to this day. So this is near the Bass Museum. Fountain. I thought these were Miami Beach very representative colors, pastel turquoise and pastel pink. This is after Hurricane Irma. It's our garage in our condo building. This is actually my son and wearing bicycle helmet. So we went biking to just assess the damage around us. You see my shadow on the right side. And this is our flooded garage. So we managed to park my car on an elevated city garage. Thankfully, they warned us. Yeah, and this is when I realized, this is going to be, if we can still somewhat ignore the question, well, not really. We're already at this point of no return with climate change. Their generation will have to respond quickly. This is our pool after Hurricane Irma. These are mangrove leaves that got chopped up and brought over from quite a distance. We actually had to bathe in the pool because there was no power. This is taken while the movie was being made. So this is they rented a boat for the crew, and then I managed to get some great images of the boat that you can't really see from the ground. The shadow of a man. This was taken on commission near Merritt Island, and this is not flooded. Something that I wanted to sort of stay away from is a cliched and sort of formulaic representation of climate change and sea level rise. So this is not flooded. This is just the land on the left side that gets developed into this kind of neighborhoods, communities. And you can see very clearly how not long-term this thinking is. This is a pairing actually from the book that was mentioned, so Manatee Downtown Miami on the left, and then a shot made just a few days after Downtown Miami. So this sort of tension between nature and culture is one of the grounding contrasts on which the book is designed in this whole series. My reflection in Biscayne Bay, it's the glass fencing, glass separation of that luxury condo. Then behind me is Biscayne Bay and Miami's iconic skyline, and a little lizard was climbing up. So this is not a collage, it's not constructed, this is just how it was. And me standing there in the sunset and sort of contemplating how do you put down the roots in a place where the only secure roots belong to mangrove trees. This is just 2 years after we moved here. Painted roots, this kind of resilience, and again that tension between nature and culture. It's overpainted, and I think the plant is still there. I actually saw it last month. I'm happy to see it thrive. I think the roots continue to be painted over, or maybe the roots just sort of grow into that paint. Manatee rescue van. The tea room in the sky. This was not anything but, I think, high tide. No hurricane. Street crossing in Little Haiti. Those of you in Miami area are aware of climate gentrification and the consequences of that on Little Haiti. So I went to photograph there a few times. This was unexpected. I was not calculating for king tides or anything. This is actually where my studio is now, Jefferson Avenue. This is just king tide in 2019 spring. People always come up to me and tell me stories. I think this is going to be a new chapter in this project, actually recording those stories. There's a man behind that fence in the middle who told me that a couple years ago his garage was floating in one of those king tides. Chickens downtown Miami. And Zaha Hadid's building in the background. This is another aerial image. So it's a commission for Bloomberg Business Week. And I was shooting a story on, actually, it was on about cattle and how cows are less heat resistant than humans. So there are studies now done on how to make cattle more heat resistant. And so it's going to be genetic modification of cows. Beach boat. The bride, I think it's bridal party in Miami Beach. I thought it kind of fit the theme. Santeria chicken. I did not know, again, what I was dealing with. I was just infinitely curious. I kept seeing chicken parts. So chicken head, this is just downtown Miami, in Brickell. And then I've seen them all throughout different places. I think Virginia Key, and finally somebody stopped me and said, well, you should probably not photograph that. This is a ritual, and then that made me look it up. And I thought it was interesting, and I thought of flood also as the sort of mythological flood, like the concept that society that's really ready for change and that needs a big overhaul. So most of these images you can see are not direct representation of climate change by any means. They are more allegorical, metaphorical thoughts on the subject. Well, this is relatively direct. Pink sidewalk. This is Bahia district after Hurricane Irma knocked down palm trees. This is a pairing. And that's how it is in the book. The book took about a year to put together. Roots. Again, resilience. The palm tree, this camouflage in Jungle Island, and that's just how it was. Unsightly gap, and they're together on pages, and they're together in most shows actually that I do. So this is the show that just closed in the middle of September. my solo exhibition at Dot 51 in Miami. And this not really diptych, but they're just sort of together, is now at the Kunsthaus Wien in Austria. Green mold. I thought it kind of looked like abstract expressionist painting, and then my son thought that it looked like forest. So that was kept Park Avenue. It's sort of a trompe-l'oeil. You can see that this is another printed billboard with ghostly figures from stock images, and the illusion is disrupted by the shadow, concrete erosion. It's just a pillar bridge. And that's how they are in exhibitions. This is my wild show, first solo museum exhibition, just this February at the Contemporary Art Museum, USF Tampa. And again, I wanted to play with this meta of photography, pictures that are framed and then frameless images as sort of part of the environment, and wildly colored walls, reminiscent of the colors of tourist brochures and the color palette of Miami itself. Hand on the left is one of the two stage still lifes. So this one is one that I set up, and it was the existing environment, so I just cut out my print and placed it there. And South Beach reflection on the right. You can see me on the bottom there photographing. Morningside, the covered car, my homage to Robert Frank. And this is Robert Frank. My influences. This fascinating dome house of the West Coast, built by this oil magnate as a vacation home, and then beach erosion. It was built with 700-foot setback from the shore in the 80s, now submerged and only accessible by boat. And it shows you, this is from the internet, it shows you how it was before. So over time, and Hurricane Irma did the damage to the last dome, it knocked it over. I was reading Gallard when I was beginning with FloodZone, and it has this theme of oversized reptiles. And inspired by that, I went with this alligator for the cover. And there it is, sort of half of it on the cover of the book. And the book just came out late last year in the United States this year, so it's available on the publisher website and on Amazon as well. This is when I arrived to Steidl, Göttingen, with my own printouts of this book. So I already had the pages laid out. The editing and the essay was made by David Campany, a British writer and curator, who's now actually a managing director at the International Center of Photography in New York. So this was very much a collaboration, like everything really that I do. It's to flip through. It's about 8 by 10, over 80 images in this book, and among those, over 50 off water, but again, not really straightforward in met water. It was sheer joy and agony to work on the book. So it took an entire year just to lay out. And this is how the gator ended up on the facade of the museum during the solo show. This is me planning out the show. This is finally my architecture skills put to use. And then this is exactly how it was. And the team at the museum was able to construct these structures for the images of billboards that I took. So now they look like billboards. It was a huge triangular space. So I wanted to make something more immersive rather than a typical gallery show. You enter this space, and the colors were sampled from the images. This is a good representation, I think, of this contrast between nature and culture. So this is when you arrive in Miami International. It's actually on Google Maps, this weird lake, really vivid shade of turquoise. And this is actually, the initial commission was for Bloomberg, and the story was on water quality and how these mines and super toxic super sites are affecting the skin aquifer. And this is how that lake looks in an exhibition. So it's printed on metal. This is again this very recent show here. And they're about 32 by 40 for the vertical prints, and then 40 by 60 for the horizontal ones. A mix of paper prints and metal prints. This is some, you can take a screenshot if you're interested in my source materials. So on the left is nonfiction research. Once I got interested in the subject, I picked up some literature. And then on the right is just an incredible collection of short stories by Lauren Groff, which is influencing heavily my next project. FloodZone continues, so this is no longer a tropical palette. I'm traveling up the Atlantic coast, which will result in the Atlantic Coast project. Environmental issues in mind again, but very different color palettes and approach. Fire Zone is another parallel project. All my projects are simultaneous. So I toggle between multiples since I don't really work as a photojournalist. Nothing ends with one story. Plus the issue, as we know, is only developing climate-wise. This is Fire Zone. This is again Bloomberg. Some images. So the plan was to go there this summer and fall, and then of course with isolation I couldn't go. And it's just a matter of logistics and grants and whenever I can manage to get away to California. Because it does require time, you know, this sort of non-formulaic, non-cliched presentation of an already too hot of a subject. It's a lot of walking, a lot of time. This is the book. Another project came out of research on Florida, Tampa offshore construction in St. Mary's, Georgia. And this is Walker Evans. So it's this monolithic figure in American photography. And it's me rephotographing the exact same site in a very similar light. And this is how it was presented in this Biennale, in the show called Walker Evans Revisited. So it's sort of in the footsteps of Walker Evans, to show you some examples. He photographed extensively in Florida. A book called The Mangrove Coast was a commission. And these are spreads from my next book on Florida. And on the left is Walker Evans, and on the right is my image. It's going to be the pairings. He also painted, and so do I. On the left is his painting. On the right is my photograph. And then some of my paintings are elsewhere. In terms of landscape sublime, that's continuing as well. It's becoming a bit more apocalyptic. So influenced by this collage by Citrian from the 20s. Here's my subtropical New York City. New York there's a great article in New York Times on how New York City is now subtropical because it arrived at certain temperatures for the summer that qualifies then fit for that new zone. This is a lay on fire. Again, this is images that are Creative Commons or public domain, and there are already so many images of fires in California that they are no longer, you know, they're protected. So people are sharing them freely. This crazy San Francisco skies. That's recently just from last month. Sort of sci-fi orange skies. Again, no direct fires here. It's just a crazy sky. And then I'll end it on a light note. Between the two projects, Landscape Sublime, which is studio-based, and then FloodZone and other observation photography that I do, I sought inspiration in photography books. So I have a collection of some photography and amassing more and more. And since I stopped teaching, I quit academia and moved to to Miami to pursue art full time, I could have breakfast. So I didn't have to teach my morning class. And I was indulge myself in a longer extended breakfast with a photo book, inspiration and kind of nourishment for both body and soul. So this is my breakfast work, right? And these exist as prints now. They're even exhibited. Breakfast with full outer reach. Also to show that nothing is made in vacuum. You know, we feed off this whole history of visual arts and photography, right? This one is actually called Kandinsky. So Outerreach, American photographer, names his composition Kandinsky after Vasily Kandinsky, and then my own melon over it, coffee. This is a recent one made in isolation on my balcony. So during COVID, Dora Maar and the crepe that I made. So these are all actual breakfast. And horse to horse, my only smoothie. And I think that's it. That would be the last one. So thank you very much for sticking here with me.
This was so wonderful. I have seen a lot of your work. I saw so much more tonight, and I've got so many backstories and learned so much. And I hope everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm pretty sure they did. Thank you, Anna, very, very much. What I wanted to say is that our next art salon is only in 3 weeks because of this election. And I didn't want to have art salon on election night. I did that once 4 years ago, and it was a disaster. Nobody came because everyone was glued to their television sets. So what we're going to do instead is have it a week early on October 27th. And our speaker that night is Juana Valdez. She is a multimedia artist who is a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, but she lives in Miami. I think she commutes, and of course, right now everything is virtual, so maybe it's easier for her. She's very well known in Miami. She's exhibited around the world, and she has a show right now at Locust Projects in Miami called Rest Ashore. Her work deals with race, transnationalism, gender, labor, and class. She uses many different mediums to tell her story. She uses printmaking and photography and video and handcrafted fabrics, and also ceramics, and does site-specific installations. So she's going to be talking about all of the different bodies of work that she's done over the years. I began to see her several years before I met her. She has a major installation that I had seen at the Perez Museum, and I've seen smaller pieces of hers at Hollywood Art and Culture, and I know that there are many other opportunities to see her work. Her work at Locust Project is there until October 24th, which is 3 days before our art salon. I always send out an email announcement to everyone about upcoming salons, but if you're not getting my emails, then I need your email address. So please go to my website, ellieshorephotography.com, and there's a place there where you can enter it. And I will add it to our constantly growing email list. Before we end, I want to thank the people who've helped to make these virtual art salons a reality. First, many thanks to Ezra and Christy Hubbard for the generous donation that they made to bring you art salons for free. And thanks very, very much to Vicki Siegel. She has been using Zoom in teaching for a while now, since this shutdown began. And she's gotten really proficient at it, and she taught me everything she knows. And the coaching was just totally invaluable. So thank you, Vicki. I want to thank over and over again my husband, Jerry Kornbluth. You see his name here. He has been my technical support for the last 6 years of Art Salon. He's been recording all of the salons, making them a little bit better in post-production and archiving them on my website. So you can go to my website and when you've got the time, look at any of the artists who have spoken in these last 6 years. And now that we're going virtual, he's done even more. He's setting up the equipment that I needed. He created the scrolling graphics that you see before and after the presentation, and all kinds of help every time I needed it. And finally, thank you to the Armory Arts Center for generously hosting art salons and the Artists of Art Salon exhibitions since 2012. And to people there, especially Naomi Wallen, who helped me really hugely to make these virtual art salons a smooth experience, I hope, for all who attended. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join us again October 27th. In the meantime, please vote early, and thank you all and good night.